Last time on Random Thoughts. Now back to our irregularly scheduled program.
Dude, not cool.
Well, I didn't want to disappoint my viewers. I gave them a planet blowing up.
But did you really have to choose this place for our temporary home while the world is being rebuilt?
What? Everyone's friendly, it's bright and colorful, we don't have stupid lockdowns, nor do we have a lot of shady stuff going on with social media or the elections. Why hate this place?
It is unnatural.
Well, if you don't want to join me on this, then go back inside. I'm pretty sure they won't follow. When it comes to answering who would win, Death Battle is undoubtedly the show that comes to mind. It is unique in that it is a relic from YouTube's early days, coming out right at the end of it, something that can be seen in its gradual evolution. While stuff like Super Mario Bros. Z, Bowser's Kingdom, and Sonic for Hire, for a time, would simply either end or never be continued once those good old early days were over, Death Battle would go on to become one of the biggest shows on YouTube, garnering millions of views with each episode. And why shouldn't it? When it came out, no other show was like it. And while it wasn't the first to ask the question of who would win in a fight, it was definitely the first to ask it with fictitious characters, and the much more free, unrestricted internet definitely allowed it to flourish. And why shouldn't it? Back when it came out, it was the only show that not only decided to actually try and figure out the winner of a fight outside of voting or discussion, but to also bring it to life. And ever since, there have been many others that have joined this trend, myself included. I used to watch it religiously, something I'd look forward to every month. But after a while, I found myself detesting the show more and more, and frankly, it's not hard to see why. Despite being the oldest, that doesn't mean what it says is always right. They have made plenty of screw-ups with outcomes, animation, research, you name it. And now that I've watched this series back in its entirety, including the episodes I didn't see, it's time we figure out which is the worst of the worst. So get your weapons, armor, and skills at the ready. We're going to be looking at the top 10 worst death battles. But before we get going, let's look over some honorable mentions. Honestly, I expected much more from this. Shira vs. Wonder Woman is probably one of the most underwhelming fights I've seen this show do. It honestly feels like the writers didn't know what to do, and as a result, relegated this to nothing more than just a simple sword fight that's not too different from what we've seen many times before. But the biggest crime that it commits is that it just feels like a bunch of wasted potential. These are demigoddesses who are capable of moving planets, they both have means of aerial dogfighting, and both have the ability to travel through space. Why is it just a sword fight in a forest? Beerus vs. Galaxia took advantage of the fact they could destroy planets and travel through space, so why not this? And let's be honest. Compared to previous fights, this one is just lackluster. He-Man vs. Lion-O was a better 80s themed battle and actually caught the corny feel from what's expected of both shows.
Sorry, Catman, but you won't string me along that easily.
And feels like a neutered version of the God Brawl we got in Thor vs. Wonder Woman. If anything, that is how this fight should have been like. In the end, there's not much else to say, and there's honestly a lot worse out there. What else can I say? No amount of power can help this Princess Promenade.
That's what power really looks like.
As a versus debater, I have done plenty of matchups that fall under the more trendy side. But I also make sure not to oversaturate my series with it. Something I'll make darn sure of not to do after watching this. You would not believe how sick I was of Death Battle doing Marvel vs. DC battles by the time of this episode. In all honesty, this made me realize just how safe these battles were and how attached Death Battle is to them. Couldn't they have just chosen something more original like Daredevil vs. Kenshi? And I know some may say they're both normal humans who are heroes in a world of superhumans who have found a way to stand out among these god-tier titans, but by that logic, why didn't they just pit Daredevil against Batman? He too fits that same criteria, and I'm pretty sure this matchup is slightly more popular. In the end, I just think they went with Nightwing because he used similar weapons to Daredevil, which is a boring reason to me. And that's how I describe this episode. Boring. The hits delivered to each character doesn't feel like it has any weight. Every time these characters hit one another, it doesn't feel like they're hitting a solid object and reacting to it. They look like they're just throwing fake punches and the other is pretending to react to it. And in all honesty, the music is not a good fit. It's just too soft and too slow for a fight scene. It just really bogs it down. And I know many will disagree with me when I say this, but I honestly do not like these live-action fights. I know it captures a gritty look and captures the look of the live-action shows both have starred in a lot better. But here's the thing. Unlike live-action and its limitations, animation has no limitations. Ever wondered why the live-action Disney remakes look so much worse in comparison to the originals? It's because you can't do things with live-action you can do with animation. You can exaggerate expressions and movement. You can get angles impossible in real life. You can make things look bigger than they'd actually be. You can emphasize impacts and so much more. If I were to pay one of my animators to do this fight, I'd have it go across rooftop to rooftop, crashing through office buildings, going across the city street, and so much more. But nope, because they had to do it in live action, they're stuck in a boring garage. At least with the forest in Shira vs. Wonder Woman, you can argue that it added a lush, colorful atmosphere. But to be fair, there are far worse episodes that committed far worse sins. But in truth, I don't need super senses to see that this battle is best left for the birds.
See you in hell.
Pop quiz! What's worse than a fight that is slow, boring, and was nothing but wasted potential? How about 2 severe downgrades from a previous, far more superior episode? Now, to be fair, both these battles have better camera angles in comparison to the original Batman vs. Spider-Man. But that's all it really has. In Batman Beyond vs. Spider-Man 2099, none of their attacks feel like they have any weight behind them, and the fight moves so much slower, nowhere near as fast-paced as the original, thus proving Mr. Lang will never be replaced. The only real tension that came from this fight was the fact Spider-Man won the last battle, and the interest in seeing if it would be any different. But in the end, it was obvious that Batman would win, as newer episodes love to wank DC. Batgirl vs. SpiderGwen, on the other hand, was...
Oh my goodness! Squidward!
How else can I describe it? It looks awful. The characters move like constipated action figures, and at moments it looks like it was animated in the same style as Red vs. Blue. The series, not the fight. They lack that much weight, and their movement is that unnatural. As for design, SpiderGwen looks okay, but my god, what did they do to Batgirl? She looks like a Barbie doll made of clay that's been on dopamine for a week. Why couldn't they just use Batgirl's model from Injustice? It looks way better than the one they made. But the worst part of this episode was that it was literally nothing but a female reskin of Batman vs. Spider-Man, down to almost the exact same reasons why Spider-Man won in the first Batman vs. Spider-Man episode. I wouldn't be surprised if they did this fight because they knew who was going to win just by looking at it. Ultimately, both of these fights were just underwhelming and looked worse by comparison to their predecessor. If this is what we can expect from future Batman and Spider-Man fights from here on out, no great amounts of power will make people go batshit for these again anytime soon.
I guess that's one way to do it.
Despite both being clowns, there's nothing to really laugh at here. Now, to be fair, this does give us an awesome death race and gives us a lot of fun interactions between both fighters.
Shut up and bleed, you mother...
I also feel like it portrays the Joker rather accurately. However, what ultimately put this as one of the worst for me is that it's a prime example of why compositing characters is a bad idea. Now, I've used composite versions of characters before, so I am not saying avoid it altogether. I'm just saying it's best to avoid using composite characters when you can, or at least only use them when absolutely necessary, either to make a battle more fair for both sides, or if one of the characters doesn't have enough information to work with, only one version. This is a case of using composite characters just because. I can name the 9 versions of Joker they're using against the 1 version of Sweet Tooth they have. Couldn't they at least throw in some PlayStation All-Star feats just to be fair? Not to mention, considering how much more devastating Sweet Tooth's arsenal is, I can literally pinpoint out many opportunities and points in the fight where Sweet Tooth would murder Joker before he could manipulate him. I don't think you need to be a doctor to know this would break every bone and liquidate every organ in Joker's body. And I know Joker is hard to kill and all, but remember, the Joker is not superhuman. He can still die just like you and me. Aside from a few good one-liners, there's just nothing sweet or laughable about this fight.
Okay, that's funny.
And with the honorable mentions out of the way, let us begin. Honestly, I couldn't expect anything less of this fight. Not only do I think there are way better opponents for both, but if Genos, someone who by their research has no means of countering or damaging War Machine, had no hope of beating War Machine, who by their research was the exact opposite, why do this matchup? Why do this matchup when the winner was so glaringly obvious? And I know my show isn't free of this either, but at least I try to find combatants who have an edge over their opponent in some way, or at least can put up a decent fight regardless of the circumstances. There was no hope of Genos winning this one, and I know people will say Genos is no weakling. I mean, he can hold his own. I'm sorry, but to me, Genos' main gimmick is that he's the anti-Saitama, where his master is this average-looking dude who stands at a lower rank than him that can fight gods and monsters without much hassle, while Genos is a very intimidating higher-ranked hero who's always getting his ass kicked just to make the One Punch Man more impressive by comparison. So really, why pit him against someone who is the exact opposite? Also, Danny Phantom vs. Jake Long should have been the fight that got the 2D treatment, not this. It does not capture the dynamic animation of One Punch Man, nor does it capture the simplicity of most Marvel cartoons nowadays. But the worst part was the fact this battle was just boring. I already knew who was going to win when it was announced just by the matchup itself. All of the hits both characters dealt had so little weight behind them, I could have sworn they were pillow boxing, and the whole fight just moved slower than it honestly should have. But to be fair, it is nowhere near the worst episode, not even close. But I know one thing, I don't need super technology or cyborg game plans to know that this fight should be left in the scrapyard.
Sorry it had to be this way.
Well, a lot of people probably expected this to be somewhere on the list, but probably not this soon. Now, this was an obvious fight that was going to happen sooner or later. It made sense. We had Mario and Sonic fight, now it's time for their sidekicks to duke it out. But my main issue stems from one a lot of other people have with this episode. Tails basically won by doing nothing. No, literally, despite Luigi having quote-unquote more combat experience, everything he did in this entire fight kept backfiring 100% of the time. Even the weapons and powers he has that should let him land at least a few good hits in, Tails somehow still gets away scot-free while Luigi is left being treated like a punching bag. And I know this may seem like me griping, especially since Tails is undoubtedly faster and could reasonably avoid most of these attacks. But here's the thing, in both Mario vs. Sonic fights, both fighters still got an equal amount of hits in. This whole battle just seemed to unfairly lean in Tails' favor all the way. If anyone's ever seen Luigi wins by doing nothing versus Tails can't die, just flip the roles of each character around and you've got this death battle in a complete nutshell. Anything Luigi did does nothing but hurt himself, while nearly everything Tails did greatly hurt Luigi. I know some people didn't like it as many saw it as a curb stomp, but at least both Kara and SCP-682 actually got some legitimately good hits on each other, instead of just 682 wailing on Kara 100% of the time. In short, if you want to see an unintentional spite match, this is the battle for you. Otherwise, it was a real kick in the side. Also, Mario Bros. 2 is not canon. Originally, I was planning on putting Scrooge McDuck vs. Shovel Knight on here. Mostly on the basis that it was a battle that I highly doubt a lot of people wanted to see. Tell me, did any of you want to see these two fight each other over Mr. Krabs or Shantae? But in all honesty, it isn't the worst perpetrator of this. In truth, I think number 8 is so guilty of this and does it so shamelessly, it might as well be like the Venom that's in it. Yup, despite people saying otherwise, this is a battle I've seen no one request in my time of watching the show. Truly a battle nobody wanted or asked for. And their reasons for having these two fight are so tenuous at best, you can honestly argue for even dumber matches. Their reason is both are characters whose lives were greatly and negatively influenced by some positive outside force in some way, and they both want it destroyed. Well, by that logic, why not have Venom fight the Grinch? After all, both of their lives were incredibly miserable due to some positive outside force, and both want to destroy those sources as well. Now, if my reasoning for Venom vs. the Grinch sounds awful and tenuous at best, then you've got enough smarts to also see the same goes for Venom vs. Bane. Both had far better opponents, and I've yet to meet someone who actually says they'd like to see these two fight in a researched battle. Or at least one done by death battle. But the two problems that put this on the list were two glaring ones. The first is that Bane had absolutely no hope or way of killing Venom. I'm sorry, but like I asked with Genos vs. War Machine, why would you put someone with no means of defeating their opponent against someone who had every means to defeat the former? All Bane had was fists and guns. Venom could literally counter or match any of that. But what truly made this worthy of the list was the fact you could barely see what's going on. I found myself actually having to skip back almost every second just to try and see what was going on. If you couldn't tell, they went with Venom's comic book color palette for this fight, and it really didn't do them any favors. They blend into the background far too well that it almost looks like Bane is fighting a shadow at times. It was that hard to see him. And that's disregarding how the camera movement makes it even more difficult to follow. Was it really that difficult to just use the Marvel vs. Capcom palette? Would people really get that angry? I think people care more about, I don't know, seeing the characters in question over how accurate the color palette is. At least with Venom vs. Krona, not only did both have ways to keep up with and counter the other, but you could actually see what was going on. In the end, this was just a pointless battle nobody wanted to see, nor could. That was just one massive curb stomp from its very conception. And from what I hear, the version on Rooster Teeth is somehow even worse. I can't even begin to tell you how many shots of anti-venom I'll need after watching this.
Up goes the weasel.
Get the hate mail ready, because I know a lot of you are just going to say, I have this here on the list because they did it better. Not only do I think this should have been a battle that happened from the get-go 10 years ago, but I also feel like it's honestly one of the most disappointing. The whole battle felt slow, and more importantly, it felt underwhelming, as I feel like a lot of potential was wasted. These are two titans who can do pretty much anything. Why not go all Inception with it? I also really don't think the music used fits the battle of this.
I'm the king. I'm the king. Yeah, hard and bright.
I'm sorry, but when I think of two nigh-omnipotent immortals with the power to destroy everything, I don't think a slow rap song is what I'd use. And I didn't! Plus, they also left out a lot of information regarding Thanos, and there were a lot of inconsistencies with the research itself. If Darkseid's true form died from Superman whistling, wouldn't a gauntlet of infinite power destroy Darkseid's true form much more easily? And yes, I know he exists outside of reality, but Thanos stated he knows the true nature of the stones. So wouldn't he already know what Darkseid is trying to do when he was goading him into his realm and refuse? Heck, Thanos once one-shot Eternity, the very embodiment of the Marvel multiverse who is also an outerversal character like Darkseid, and took his place as all of existence because of it. I'm sorry, but I think Thanos has a lot of methods to actually keep up with Darkseid. Defeat him? Not so sure, but at least they wouldn't be downplaying the absurd power of the Infinity Gauntlet. In short, this battle had infinite possibilities, but it feels like they didn't even want to try to go for any of them. If I had the power to manipulate existence itself, this episode would be gone in a snap.
Behold, in endless death.
I am willing to bet a lot of you guys were probably expecting Goku vs. Superman 2 to appear somewhere on this list. I'm sorry to disappoint, but it won't. My reasoning is because it only had one issue. Them using two new Super Saiyan forms before we knew anything about them. The other issues it has can be traced directly back to the first. Now, to be fair, the episode has great animation that still holds up even today. Or maybe because their newer 3D battles look like shit. And to be even more fair, it was not just the only researched Goku vs. Superman fight when it was released, but it was an absolutely massive event. The most debated battle of a generation coming to life. I am also willing to bet it was this episode that got them on the map. But that's where the positives end. Given what we know about Goku now, and with GT no longer canon, this episode is horrifically outdated. And hey, even their power scaling is so bad, it's blatantly obvious. Not to mention, they overplay Superman so much in this fight. I am sorry, but Superman is not limitless. They'll happily look at the Daisenshu, but ignore similar books for Superman that contradicts their own research. How about you stop doing theories and power scaling and actually listen to what Superman's actual writers have to say for once? Now, I will acknowledge Superman is stronger than Goku, or at least he was back in the day. But just because Superman is stronger than Goku, it doesn't mean it guarantees him victory. There's more to a battle than just brute force alone, and Goku's basically made a career at defeating opponents who are leagues more powerful than him at this point. And while Goku is in character for most of the fight, Superman is not. He is more in line with his portrayal in injustice in this fight than he is with the Superman most people are familiar with. He is willing to destroy an entire planet of innocents and Goku without as much of a second thought. At times, it even feels like he eggs Goku on instead of actually trying to stop the battle like, Superman would to keep his city from being destroyed.
You think this is a game? I haven't even begun to play.
Now, I personally do think Superman himself is a boring character in the main DC continuity, and his most interesting appearances are his one-off or Elseworld stories. But I don't think portraying Superman with little care about collateral damage, the certain loss of human life, and an odd desire to fight like Goku does, is how I'd portray Superman. Plus, Masako X as Goku is very distracting. I know people love his portrayal of the character, but his Goku is completely different from the canon one as it's a parody of the character.
I am the Super Saiyan Son Goku!
And I am a Super Saiyan!
And those who haven't seen Dragon Ball Z Abridged would just be confused as to why he sounds like this. I know this battle was one of the biggest fights they've done, and it was a huge event back in the day, but oh boy. By today's standards, this battle is anything but super.
You're insane!
Though I do enjoy the show, as I've made it very clear, I can admit when they make mistakes. Now, don't get me wrong, Yang vs. Tifa is a fun battle. It's cool they got the voice actor of Yang to play her, and Tifa makes sense since she is the most popular opponent for Yang, even to this day. But this is where my praise ends. Not only is the research in this episode outdated with all the new feats and weapons Yang's gotten over the years, but it came out way too early for Yang to be used. Heck, for any Ruby character to be used. This battle was released before Volume 3 of Ruby even began. Back then, Yang's best feats were smashing the Paladin in one strike and defeating a group of thugs. Nowadays, she's defeated bandits, elite huntresses, destroyed meteors, casually matched Larger Grimm, defeated mad scientists. My point is, Yang is a lot more powerful now than she was back then with only 2 volumes. It's rich how they said they wouldn't use Ruby until she was fully developed as a character, but they didn't do the same with Yang. Heck, they waited a lot longer to use Weiss, so why not just wait a little bit longer to use Yang? And even then, Tifa should have won in hindsight. She's able to hold her own against beings that make anything Ruby has shown thus far look like child's play, and they completely left out how aura works. Yang's power may keep increasing every time she's struck, but her aura also depletes the more times it is struck. If her aura depletes entirely, she is no more invulnerable than a normal person, something Tifa doesn't need to worry about as, despite being called a glass cannon, she is nowhere near as squishy as Yang is without her aura. It was undoubtedly the start of Death Battle having a true bias towards certain combatants, and the show suffered from this ever since. This is why, when it comes to the debates I tackle, I never say I settle the debates once and for all, because I am always bound to get something wrong at some point, and every versus show out there is not free of this problem. But with Death Battle, anyone who disagrees with them, they'll rebuke, ignore, or pretend they don't exist. As well, while Tifa is a popular opponent for her, she may not have been the best choice of opponent for Yang, or at least at the time. Agent Tex, Arden, Ayane, Genosa Arma, Leone, and Sakura were honestly better opponents for Yang at the time than Tifa was. Not to mention, Tifa's voice acting sounds off at times, like it was recorded with lower quality microphones compared to what Yang's voice actor had.
Warm-up's over. Does this mean no sunrise?
I would have honestly put this even further down the list, but in all honesty, there were a lot more episodes I found to be worse than this one. In the end, this will be the final time I go to see this fantasy. Also, why didn't they use Tifa's more iconic outfit? I know it may seem like a minor gripe, but it's like having Wolverine in a fight and having him wear the costume from the X-Men movies as opposed to the iconic yellow one. Why?
Nailed it.
This one is just plain disgusting with how they treated both characters. What can I say about this fight that others haven't? They grossly downplayed the Hulk to make him look far weaker than he actually is, and they disgustingly overplayed Doomsday to make him look far stronger than he actually was. I'm sorry, but World Breaker Hulk did not lose to Sentry. It was World War Hulk, or Green Scar as they'd go on to call him, that fought Sentry to a standstill. And remember, the Sentry is basically the most broken character in Marvel history. He is basically their version of Dr. Manhattan. It's even worse because they happily ignored a lot of feats and information or grossly misunderstood or used feats out of context. In the New 52, for example, Doomsday was only able to punch his way out of the Phantom Zone because someone else was weakening it for him. Not as impressive as Hulk destroying an entire dimension just through him fighting, now is it? As well, Doomsday's immunities after his resurrections aren't a universal thing. Doomsday has been killed the same way twice in the past, and while it's difficult, it's nothing the Hulk hasn't dealt with before. In the World War Hulk storyline, Hulk once fought the X-Man called Darwin, a mutant whose power is instantaneous adaptation and reactive evolution to any situation he finds himself in. You know, basically what Doomsday does. During their fight, Darwin's powers determined the best way to confront the Hulk was to not confront the Hulk, and was promptly teleported out of the fight and away from Hulk's destructive path. A being with adaptive powers with no known upper limit that could arguably be comparable to Doomsday's could not hope to match the Hulk. You'll happily look for information on if Raiden can cut through adamantium, but you won't look for information on if Hulk can overpower Doomsday's adaptations. And even then, it just gets a lot of information wrong. How on earth did they confuse World War Hulk with World Breaker Hulk? How can they say light speed is a rarity in Marvel when it's clearly not? How can they say Doomsday is light speed when he never actually tagged someone going light speed with his bare hands? They'll ignore how bloody obvious World War Hulk tied with Sentry, but will ignore how obvious it was that Doomsday died before Superman sort of did. Hulk's healing factor cannot be overclocked. It's not a real weakness. It's a misconception gained through information they got wrong. Only reality warping and powerful forms of energy can bypass it. And no, a mindless brute like Doomsday does not directly scale to an omnipresent god capable of destroying all of creation just by existing. This honestly feels like Death Battle didn't give a crap about Hulk and just wanked Doomsday because he scales to Superman, who they love to double down on being absolutely limitless. In short, Despite this being a great fist fight and this being a battle I really wanted to see them tackle, it was ultimately anything but incredible. Despite being something that should have happened back in Season 1, this battle was already ruined from the get-go. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mind it if Death Battle does fights I've already done before. Heck, I've done battles others have done before, and have even considered doing some battles they did just to put my own thoughts on it and see if anything changes. However, when Death Battle did Spyro vs. Crash, my main issue is that they still used the Crash Bandicoot from the classic games, but they used the Spyro from the Legend trilogy, and Skylanders. By using the Spyro from his second generation of games, and some information from his third generation of games, they completely throw out the whole reason behind this popular rivalry. It's a battle between the original platforming mascots of the entire PlayStation lineage. Without these two, other iconic franchises associated with the PlayStation would probably never exist, or at least as the way we know them now. Sly Cooper, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, Uncharted, The Last of Us, Twisted Metal, Resident Evil, even freaking God of War would probably not exist if these two never paved the way for the PlayStation. So why use the Spyro from the Legend trilogy, which absolutely curbs some Crash any day? It's no longer a battle of classic platforming PlayStation mascots because this version of Spyro is not the Spyro that Crash is commonly compared to. This version has more in common with Aang from Avatar than with Crash Bandicoot, for freaking crying out loud. It's even worse, because the models and voices they use for Spyro and Sparx are more reminiscent of the original games, despite the Spyro they're using not being classic Spyro.
What are you doing?
I see you, my little glowing friend.
Seeing and catching are two different things, a big boy.
It makes sense for Crash because they're using the original Crash. But with Spyro, it just makes it very confusing and jarring for those who have played the Legend of Spyro. And to top it all off, the fight felt very underwhelming. It felt very slow most of the time, and none of the impacts had any weight or meaningful impact to them. Like with Spyro's Fury attack. I know Crash survived powerful explosions before, but the way I would have done it is have Crash's fur be at least covered in soot, and have him hit the ground so hard it cracks beneath him, instead of just him being pushed to the ground. Or how about during their little chase? I would have it be fast-paced, not as fast as Sonic, but something similar. In short, this is a classic battle that other Versus shows, including my own, has done, and most of them have done it a lot better. I guess you can say this battle just simply crashed and burned.
Nobody messes with me, pal.
This was always the battle I wanted to see. This was my Batman vs. Spider-Man, Goku vs. Superman, and Mario vs. Sonic. I even had it planned for Season 1 of Fan War long before the fight I ended up doing instead. But as time went by, I found myself less enamored with this episode more and more. Godzilla vs. Gamera. The first kaiju fight Death Battle's done, and in all honesty, it really shows. The rendering in this fight looks atrocious. Definitely a severe downgrade from the CGI fights we had previously, and it definitely doesn't hold up to other CGI fights they have done later. I know they're giant monsters, so they're going to move very slow, but I am not complaining about that. I'm complaining about how the fight looks. The physics are bad. The water looks like that weird plastic you see in gift baskets when it's moving and blue paint when it's not. And you can see it seeping through the model of the city street. When Gamera dies, it looks like his remains are rolling over a table, not something from an explosion. The debris they both kick up is too floaty, like they're filled with helium. There's no weight to it. And any special effect they use doesn't look right, like they just stuck GIFs on the characters' models. Heck, they couldn't even get Godzilla's nuclear pulse right. They also left out certain feats that put both kaiju on relatively more equal ground. For example, while Godzilla unwillingly went into that volcano screaming as he went in, Gamera willfully crawled into a volcano twice and came out unharmed. Does that change the outcome? Doubt it, but still. But the part that gets to me is the Godzilla model they use. It almost always has a dead stare on it, and the proportions on it are awkward as hell, like it was made to be a very scary Muppet. There are points where the models are also completely static, like they've turned into stone and it just looks even weirder. In short, despite them giving their best effort, with bad rendering, bad special effects, and bad models that looked more like evil Sesame Street characters, their first giant monster battle just ultimately came up a little short. Now, I considered avoiding putting anything from the first half of Season 1 on the list, simply because they are the oldest episodes and as such, they don't have the same budget or standards as the newer episodes do. However, I think it needs to be said. Let's just get the most glaringly obvious problem out of the way. The episode aged like spoiled dairy. I know it's a joke episode, but I really doubt Justin Bieber and especially Rebecca Black have the same presence and relevance now as they did back when this was released. And if not now, then it's for certain no one will remember who these two were in the next 10 to 20 years, thus making this episode incredibly dated. But what really makes this the worst episode for me is that it's probably the most tasteless and mean-spirited episode Death Battle has ever done. They are constantly making fun of and belittling these two throughout the episode, up to the point of making them seem a lot worse as a person than they actually are.
Why would anyone want more than one of this musical abomination roaming this planet?
And I know it's a joke episode, but with something like Smokey vs. McGruff or Chuck Norris vs. Segata, they were making fun of fictitious personas of real-life people and organizations. These are not fictitious personas. These are actual people they are making fun of. And I know it's common to make Justin Bieber jokes, and maybe Rebecca Black jokes if we're stretching it, but it's just not funny here. It's the same repetitive joke over and over again. These two are bad singers who get more praise than they deserve. That's it. They do this so much that it gets to the point where it comes off as really disrespectful, especially when it comes to the trauma both have faced. This is a woman who received death threats. Threats to her very life that got the police involved, and Death Battle not only has her interview about the event re-edited and recontextualized.
I hope you cut yourself, and I hope you get an eating disorder so you'll look pretty.
But also basically said the same thing to her those people did by not only murdering her and her idol, but also many other similar celebrities just for giggles. I am not sorry for saying this, but that is truly in bad taste. Say what you will about them slandering Luigi. At least he was a fictitious character. Say what you will about them downplaying Tifa. At least she was a fictitious character. These two are not. It is dated, it is unfunny, It is distasteful, it is disrespectful in all the worst ways. And this is done to two real-life people. And that is why Justin Bieber versus Rebecca Black is the #1 worst death battle of all time.
Well, let's let the audience decide on who sucked the most.
And thank you for watching. Which death battles do you think is the worst? Leave them down in the comment section below. In the meantime...
Fish mob! They've swarmed the house!
I need to go save 2 dog mob. I'm 1 fish mob, and hopefully we'll have a better living situation in the future.
Hurry up! There's so many colors in here, even Walt Disney would go colorblind! And why is that one flying on a narwhal?
Narwhals swimming in the ocean, causing a commotion, cause they are so awesome. Narwhals swimming in the ocean, pretty big and pretty wide, and beat a polar bear in a fight.